Hello students, myself Pushpendra Singh and we are going to start with our ninth class history. So we were basically studying the world history. Okay, so today you have the class for the history also for the class ninth, and these lectures are basically based on the NCERT based classes on NCERT based books. So you can refer the NCERT books also for the better understanding. You can supplement for your preparation with the help of these lectures. And those students who have just started the preparation, they can also subscribe our channel on the YouTube, where you will get the daily NCERT based classes. Okay, we have also started the current affairs based classes. They are also available on the YouTube, so you can subscribe our channel on the YouTube, that is Future IAS, and there you will get the daily classes which are based on the NCERT books as well as which are based on the current affairs. All right, so let's begin with the lecture. Okay, so let's understand first the forest society and the colonization, right? How the Britishers impacted our forest society, how the Britishers impacted our forest land or the forest. So as you know that the forest is basically, or forests are providing great importance to us. They provided lot of raw materials, right? They provided lot of products. They provide us lot of benefits, right? You have they provide oxygen availability, they provide recharge of the groundwater, they provide fruits, they provide timber, right? They provide lot of space to live for the floral and the faunal species, right? They are also called the lungs, right? Specifically because they provide much needed oxygen that is required for all living beings, including the humans. Okay, so here they support large varieties of flora, fauna. Flora means the flowers, and the fauna means basically animals, different species of the animals. Specifically in the forest areas, if you visit the Amazon forest, which is lying basically in the equatorial region, right, which are a rich, very rich forest. They are very dense also. Specifically, if you visit in the Western Ghats, they are also very rich, very dense, because they are falling in the basically windward side of the mountain, that is on the Western Ghats. But why this deforestation is going on throughout the world? The deforestation is the process by which we call them disappearance of the forest. But why this disappearance of the forest is being going on not only in India but also throughout the world, right? So the deforestation is going on because of various reasons, right? First of all, the basically the anthropogenic regions are there. The anthropogenic regions means the man-made regions, right? Which is basically, you can say that for the industrial development, for the development purpose, for setting up different type of infrastructure, right? Deliberately cutting down the forest for the purpose of timber, right? So all such activities are basically led to expansion of the cities, right? Which are also falling in the belt of the forest, right? So all such activities which are pertaining to the anthropogenic regions are basically destroying the forest. So you can say that there are many regions for the destroying of the forest in India, also in the world. So first of all, in India, because the forest does not return or does not produce enough returns, so the forests are considered as unproductive initially. So what happens is the Britishers basically brought them under cultivation, because in the cultivation, right, the basically Britishers used to get the some sort of revenue from the cultivated land, right? So that is they could basically increase the revenue for the state. So for the Britishers basically, so the forests were basically cleared for the purpose of cultivation. So one reason that was initiated the deforestation process was the conversion of the forest land into basically the cultivable land, and that was for the purpose of the basically getting more revenue from the cultivable land, that is from the production, that is from the produce of different type of products on the land. Next, for the building of ships, by 1830s many trees were basically cut down, right? And they were basically exported to the Britain, to the England. Why? For the building of ships. So definitely ships were needed for the transportation purpose, for transporting lot of commodities from different colonies to the Britain, to the England. For that purpose, the shipbuilding activities was going on, and the ships were basically also used the huge amount of the timber that was basically sourced from the India. Then, as the railways basically developed, right, in 19th century, what happens is the railway tracks also needed, the sleepers. So the wood was needed for the railways. Definitely for the railway track, the wood was basically, initially the sleepers was basically made up of wood. Okay, later they were converted into the concrete. Now the also the fuel for the train is also needed, right, for that purpose. Now the railway line sleepers, which was essential to hold the tracks together, was also made up of the wood. So all such activities basically led to the deforestation. Then obviously the plantation is basically an economic activities which basically devoted the large tract of the land for the particular produce. Say for the particular produce means for the single crop, that is for the tea, that is for coffee, or that is for rubber. So that is the large scale natural forest was basically cut down. They were basically cleared for the purpose of this plantation, where the large scale growth or large scale growing of the tea, rubber, coffee is basically grown on that land, definitely to meet the growing need of the basically Europe for these commodities. So that was also reason that the large tract of the land was also cleared. Then the rise of commercial forestry. Then definitely the commercial forestry, where the forest and its and its basically different products are basically used for the purpose of revenue, for the purpose of getting returns. So the Britishers made basically a German expert called Dietrich Brandis as a first Inspector General of Forest in India. Okay, and the Brandis, who was the first Inspector General of the Forest in India, was basically set up the Indian Forest Service in 1864. That is basically we call it IFOS, the Indian Forest Service, which is being conducted at the examination by the Union Public Service Commission or UPSC. Okay, and what happens is the Brandis also helped to formulate the Indian Forest Act 1865 that was basically passed. Now, with that effort of the Brandis, also the Imperial Forest Research Institute was set up, that is the Forest Survey of India, right, which is being set up in the Dehradun for the purpose of scientific forestry. So the scientific forestry was basically taught here. That is the oldest forest research institute even today in India. Okay, in the field of scientific forestry system, right, different type of forest, different kind of trees were replaced by the plantation, right, for the purpose of growth, for the purpose of revenue, for the purpose of scientific management of this forest. Okay, these forest management plans are also made by the forest officials, right. So that is in the plans, the forest official used to plan how much of the forest that has to be cut, right, how much the forest that has to be replanted, how much it is required, some sort of a scientific intervention. All such things are basically put under basically your the forest management plans. So that were also obviously some aspect related to the development of the forest. And now these forest acts were divided into the three types of forest initially. So first is basically reserve forest, right. Now reserve forests are basically very rich in terms of their floral and faunal composition. So they were best forest in terms of the diversity. The villagers are generally not allowed to enter into the forest. So everything is banned unless it is permitted. So everything is restricted unless it is permitted. So that is the villagers were not allowed to enter in this forest, right. Second is you have the protected forest. In that protected forest, what happens is the villagers can enter the forest but with the permission. That means the villagers can enter into the forest, but they need basically the permission from the forest officials in order to enter into the protected forest. And the third one is basically called village forest. Now village forests are basically found in the village periphery or in the villages. Now definitely with that forest act that was passed by the Britishers, the villagers basically got dissatisfied because they were not allowed to enter into the reserve forest, and that too in the protected forest they have to take the permission from the forest official, from the Britishers, right, to enter those forests, right. And now what happens is the villagers basically resorted to steal the wood from the forest. Now In that process, if the villagers basically were caught, they were punished. So what would happen? There was a lot of the violence that has also led to different tribal communities that were residing in the forest land also revolted against such type of the Forest Act that was passed by the Britishers at that point of the time. Okay, now how these forest acts were basically affected the people. So first of all, the shifting cultivation. The shifting cultivation means it is a basically age-old traditional cultivation system which is being used in the tribal belt specifically. See, what is shifting cultivation? Shifting cultivation means, for example, you have a piece of land, right? For example, this is the forest area. Now what will happen? There is some tribal population which basically does this shifting cultivation. Now what will happen? They will clear this patch of the forest. How they will clear? They will first cut down and they will burn. So that is also called slash and burn agriculture. Slash and burn agriculture. Okay, that is also called slash and burn agriculture. So what happens is they basically first cut down the forest and they burn, and in that ashes they basically distribute that ashes in the land in order to increase the fertility of the land, and they basically cultivate the forest, cultivate the basically crops in that land. And what happens is after 2 to 3 years, because such land will also have its own capacity, right? They will cultivate for hardly for 2 to 3 years, and they will abandon this land, completely abandon this land and move to the new piece of the land. Again they will clear this land, they will cut down, they will burn, they use this land, right? And that they use this land for the next 2 to 3 years, and then they will move to the new piece of the land, right? Again they will cut and they will burn and they use this land, again abandoning, and this process they will continue to move from one piece of the land to the another piece of the land. This type of cultivation they call shifting cultivation, because what is shifting here? The land is basically being shifted. One land is being shifted to the another land, then third, then fourth. So the same people is basically shifting that agricultural land, right, over the period of the time. That is why it is called shifting agriculture. Now this area is cleared for the cultivation for the period of the time, and after that it has been left uncultivated so that it can gain fertility by its own natural gaining of the fertility. Okay, now the colonial foresters did not favor this system. Why they did not favor this system? Because in this system, first of all, it's very difficult to calculate the tax. How will you calculate the tax? Because you are shifting the land very often after 2 to 3 years, right? And there is also danger of the fire, because you have to cut down, you have to burn that forest. So definitely there is a danger of the fire in the forest, right? And the no trees could grow on this kind of land, because there is also burn down, and you could also use that forest for the purpose of crops. Now how much the tree will be grow, that is also again a problem. So all such things has led to the Britishers to oppose this shifting cultivation, specifically in certain parcels of the forest regions. So what will happen? The Britishers basically banned this shifting cultivation, right? So what happens is, what is the consequences of banning of shifting cultivation? So some people change the occupations. So they change the occupations from shifting cultivation. They become some sort of other. They took other occupations, or they simply resorted to the permanent type of agriculture, right? Some people resorted to this practice or this banning of the shifting cultivation by rebellions. So many such rebellions occur, right? If you have seen in your modern history book, you have seen that the Munda rebellion were basically against such type of practices. Okay, now such type of forest laws that were basically also forbade the villagers from hunting in the forest. But what happens is, right, because hunting was basically is age-old practice that was basically done by the forest, done in the forest by the villagers. So that is again, right, encourage the hunting in a big sport, right? And they also felt that the wild animals were basically savage, right? So just like in Indian society, it was a duty to civilize them. It was a duty to civilize them, right? So it is also felt by them, and new trades, new employment, new services were also introduced by the Britishers. So forest communities that definitely who were based on the forest, they rebelled against such changes which was imposed on them in terms of the new trades, new employment, new services, and basically putting lot of restrictions on the forest land, specifically the people of Bastar. The people of Bastar, they were basically, revolted against such practices. So here, the Bastar is basically land, or is basically now the Bastar is basically a district in the Chhattisgarh, which is a state. So the Bastar is basically the southernmost part of the Chhattisgarh, which is a state currently. Now, the initiative to revolt was basically taken by the Dhruvas of Kangar forest, right? Where the reservation first took place. All such restrictions were put place. Now, whatever the new law of the Forest Act, which basically introduced by the colonial government, right, they reserved 2/3 of the forest in 1905, right? So they reserved this forest that were previously used by some tribal people in that region. So what happens is there was huge rebellion that was spread, that because of such reservation of 2/3 of the forest land for the purpose of the Britishers. So what happens is the rebellion was basically ultimately crushed by sending the British troops. So British troops were sent to suppress the rebellion at that point of the time, right? And it took the Britishers to control that rebellion almost 3 months. So it took the 3 months to completely repress this rebellion, right? It was a victory to the Bastar people. Why? Because that work on the reservation was ultimately suspended, right? To reserve 2/3 of the forest basically for the purpose of the Britishers. So that reservation was basically suspended, and that was the area, that is, instead of 2/3 was basically reduced to half. That was basically planned before 1910. So that was basically gave the victory to the people of the Bastar, right? Definitely, when people will basically have rebelled against such type of the practices which were basically imposed by the Britishers. So that has again led to the initiation of the rebellion, specifically in those regions. Okay. Now there is also changes in the Java, right? Now what was happens, right? There were many people. If you say the Java was basically is basically an island, right? So there the Kalangs, which were basically the tribal people, they rose to the rebellions against the Dutch. Dutch was basically the colonial master in the Java. Java, Sumatra is a part of Indonesia in 1770, right? And their surprising were basically suppressed by the Dutch, specifically against such discriminatory laws. Then in the Java, the scientific forestry was introduced, definitely by the Dutch. So what happens is the forest laws, just like in India, just like we have seen, the forest laws were enacted in the Java. Okay, now in the similar way that the Indian, the tribal people or Indian indigenous people revolted against such type of the laws which were imposed by the Dutch. So there also the villagers basically registered to these laws which were basically introduced by the Dutch, right? And just like in India, that forest timber was used to send to the basically to the England for the purpose of building of the ships. There also the forest timbers were basically used for the purpose of ship and the railway sleepers. Similar activity just like India was going on, right? And the Dutch government also used the basically Belandogending system, that is for the extraction of the free labor from the villagers. So that was also some sort of a begar, right? The free labor that was basically done specifically by the villagers. So that was also led to some sort of a resistance against such type of practices. Now, then what happens is there was a Samim movement that was started around 1890, right? Samim was basically basically a village where you have some sort of a teak cultivation. The teak is type of basically a forest, or teak of type of basically a tree. So such type of teak forest village or such type of the basically practices will question the state ownership of the forest, specifically the Samim of the Rudang Watung villages. Okay, and that has basically led to the widespread movement basically spread in this region. Now that protest by lying on the ground that the Dutch came to survey on it and refusing to pay the tax and perform the labor. So what happens is over the period of the time, the people, they have developed the resistance. So what happens is when the Britishers came to the survey, right, they refused to pay the taxes and they refused to perform the labor that was basically, used by the free, performance of the labor, specifically because of the forces of the Dutch. And because of the world wars also affected, the forests across the world. So the deforestation also activities were also very high during the world wars. So the world war, that is first world war, that is from 1914 to 1918, and second world war in 1939 to 1945, right? What happens is this world war also impacted, the forest. So what happens is the major forests were basically impacted. Definitely these world wars also increased the demand from the Britishers to meet the demand for the timber. So what happens is in the Indonesia, the Dutch destroy the sawmills and they burned huge piles of the teak logs, right, to meet the demand. And the Japanese, after occupying the Indonesia, they have also exploited the forest. That were basically because there was high need of the development of the ships, specifically for the purpose of the waging of the war. So to fulfill the needs of the war, the Japanese also resorted the exploitation of the forest. Similarly, the Dutch also resorted the exploitation of the forest, specifically in the Indonesia. Similarly, the Britishers also resorted such type of exploitation in India. Okay, so that has ultimately led to the new development. What was the new development? Now the government basically realized, right, that if the forest are to survive, because without local community you cannot protect the forest, or you cannot encourage the forest, or you cannot sustain and you cannot manage the forest, right? So government basically realized if forests are to survive, right, you need to involve the local communities. Without involvement of the local community you cannot manage the forest, right? So that was one of the examples that India, where the communities were involved in the conservation of the forest, in the protection of the forest. So the communities are basically conserving the forest, specifically in the secret groups. The secret groups are basically culturally and custom by custom, it is very important, they are basically not disturbed since the generations, and they are basically considered very pious, right, very sacred. That is what they are called, sacred groups. And the tribals who basically protect these sacred groups, they used to worship just like a god and goddess of these sacred groups, right? So the large number of villagers were basically involved, right, and to protection of such type of secret groups. So there's one such example, that initially the Britishers basically some sort of skeptical about the involvement of the villagers, but later they resorted the involvement of the villagers for the protection of these sacred groups. Next, in the modern world, after the World War, the pastoralism activities were basically started. So what is the pastoralism? See, pastoralism is basically a practice, it's an economic practice where you will have the goats, sheep and cattle rearing. So here you will have the goat farmers, sheep farmers, cattle farmers. They used to rear those animals, definitely for the purpose of wool, definitely for the purpose of meat. There were many reasons for that, and such activities is known as pastoralism. And those persons who are involved in the pastoralism, they are called pastoralists. Okay, now such type of pastoralism activities are basically very famous in the nomads. They used to move in search of pasture from one place to another place. So they are pastoral nomads. They used to move with the animals like goats, sheep and cattle, and they used to move. So specifically in the mountainous region, if you visit Jammu and Kashmir, you will find Gujjars and the Bakarwals. These Gujjars and the Bakarwals are basically nomads, pastoral nomads, right? So they used to move in the groups called Khalifa. Their group will call Khalifa, and definitely they govern with the movement of some sort of a cold and the snow. So whenever there is enough pasture is available at the low level, they will come down to the to the plainer areas, and when there is no enough pasture, they move to the higher areas, right? So during such type of cold and the winter and the summertime, they used to move, right? Their movement is governed by cold and the snow, right? So in the winters, when the high mountains are covered with the snow, definitely they will come down to the low hills, specifically of the Shivalik, because at that point of the time at the high mountains, because of these mountains are covered with the snow, there is no place for basically for the grazing purpose. It is completely covered. So they used to come down with their animals. With the onset of the summer, when the snow basically melt, right, these mountains will have the lush and green grasses, right? They become very green. So they move again to the higher reaches, right? And then they used to move with their animals, right? And the pastoral activities basically continue. So that is how they continue to move up and down with the changing in the seasons, right? With the changes of the summer and the winter. In the similar way, you have in the Himachal Pradesh, you have Gaddi, the Gaddi, which are also called shepherds, right? So they also does the similar activities during winter, right? They spend in the low Shivalik hills, because at the upper reaches you will have completely snow covered, mountains. And in the summers, specifically, they used to live in the Lahul and the Spiti, because in the summers these these upper reaches are basically cleared of the snow, and there is lush and green forest, lush and green grasses are basically grown, right? Then there is in the Kumaon Himalaya, in the Garhwal Himalayas, there is also the Gujjar cattle herders. They used to go down over there also in terms of their animals. They spend the summers in the Bugyals and their winters in the Babur, right? They are the two places where they can find easily the green grasses over the period of the time. Similarly, you will have the Bhotias, Sherpas, Kinnori. They are all tribal peoples which they continue to move in the cyclic movement, right? Why the cyclic movement? Because they need the grazing land, they need the place to live, right? So they used to move with the changes of the seasons, right? So that they can best use of the rearing land, best use of the land which can be used as a pasture for the feeding of their animals at that point of the time. Okay, if you come to the plateaus, plains and the deserts, you will find the dungars which are found in the Maharashtra. So the dungars basically found in the central plateau of Maharashtra, right, during the monsoon. Okay, and as you know, this central plateau of the Maharashtra is basically a semi-arid region. Okay, then by the October, when somewhat winter started, they begin their movement towards Konkan, which is basically some sort of a coastal area, right? So their cattle help to manure the fields, and hence they basically welcome by the Konkani people, because they bring with their these cattle used to bring lot of manure, right? And these manures are basically used in the fields. So that is how the Konkani people also basically welcome such type of dungars which basically come down from the central plateau of the Maharashtra to the Konkan region, right? So as soon as the monsoon started, what will happen? They retreat back to the semi-arid land of Maharashtra, because during that monsoonal period they need basically some land where they can stay with their animals. So Konkani basically is the land where monsoonal activities are very high. So they don't find the enough pasture, they don't find the enough space to live over there. So they retreat back to their central plateau of Maharashtra. So again, there is a cyclic movement from central plateau of the Maharashtra to the Konkan region, specifically by the October. And then as soon as the monsoon came up, right, they go back to the semi-arid land of Maharashtra, that is central plateau of the Maharashtra. And then during the monsoon, I'm talking. So during monsoon, they live in the central plateau of the Maharashtra, right? And as October comes, they came back to the Konkan region. Then during the monsoon season, they go back to the central plateau of Maharashtra. In the similar way, you will find the Golas and the Kurmas, right, and the Kuruvas of Karnataka and Andhra Pradesh. So Golas, again, they also have the cattle. So they also herded cattle, right? These Kurumas and the Kuruvas, they basically reared the sheep and the goats. Okay, and they also made the blankets. So they also sold the woven blankets. Okay, now these type of people who are the Golas, Kurmas and Kuruvas, they used to live nearby the woods, right? And specifically in the dry periods, they move to the coastal tracts because they need also water for their animals. So during dry period, they used to move to the coastal tracts. Okay. In the similar way, you will have the Banjaras. Banjaras are there in the Rajasthan, Uttar Pradesh, Punjab, Madhya Pradesh, and Maharashtra. These Banjaras, they used to cover long distance, right? Why they used to cover the long distance? Because they are also in the need of the pasture land, because they always have their cattle with them. Now, for the cattle feeding, they need basically the good pasture land, and wherever they found the good pasture land, they used to settle over there. Okay. In the similar way, you will have the Raikas. The Raikas are basically found in the Rajasthan, in the deserts of the Rajasthan. So in the deserts of the Rajasthan, you will mainly find the Raikas. These Raikas are basically found in the region, right, where the rainfall is basically meager or uncertain, right? So they combine with the cultivation with the pastoralism. What happens is, the cultivation, they give them certain food, right? For example, your crops. In the pastoralism, they used to get the basically your meat, milk, right? Some sort of a skin, hide, right? All such things they used to get. So they used to supplement their income with the help of pastoralism. So they combine cultivation with the pastoralism, because the rainfall in that region is basically meager and very uncertain. So it is basically, some sort of a rain deficit area, right? And whenever their grazing grounds become dry, they move to the new and the greener pastures, right? For the search of the good pasture lands for the purpose of their cattle, which they are used to have. Okay. Now this pastoral life, which is sustained by definitely, right, by their judgment, because they have lot of experience since the generations together, right, that how much at one particular place they used to stay, right, how often they used to move, right, how frequent they used to move. So that type of knowledge they have since the generations together. So it's a sense of judgment that basically provides them the ability to take the decisions done, right, and to know where they could find the food and the water. So definitely with that knowledge, with that sense of judgment, they have lot of experience where they could find, right, the food and the water. And in search of food and the water, they used to move from one place to the another place in search of such items. Okay. Then ability to set up a relationship with the farmers, so that they could so that the herd could graze on the harvested fields, right? So definitely whenever they are moving up, because if they are going to settle at one place, okay, they used to have some sort of a symbiotic relationship, some sort of a good relationship with the farmers, so that the cattle, they are there with them, they could also graze on the harvested field, right, so that they could get some sort of a green pasture for their animals. So what happens is, with the colonial rule, how the pastoral life basically affected. Okay, so under the colonial rule, every section of the society got affected, right, and the pastoralism activities also got affected. So they have changed completely the activities of pastoralism under the colonial rule. So how they affected? So first of all, you must understand, the Britishers was not interested in such type of the grazing land, because the grazing land do not provide them the good source of revenue. They don't provide the source of revenue. So what happens is, the Britishers resorted to convert these grazing lands into cultivated farms. So they convert this grazing land into cultivated farms, because cultivated farms ultimately would provide the Britishers the good source of revenue. So that is the first thing. Then the Forest Act, which was implemented by the Britishers, they restricted movement of the pastoralism in the forest. So obviously, if you've seen here, the reserve forest specifically, no outsiders or no village persons are allowed. So once, for example, a piece of the land is declared, for example, a reserve forest. Now what will happen if the reserve forest falling on the way of, on the path of the movement of this, the tribal people, they cannot move, because it is reserved. It is reserved and the peoples are not allowed. So what will happen? Definitely it restricts the movement of the people. Some customary rights were also granted to them, which were previously, granted to the villagers. Now they have granted to the basically to the Britishers, right? Now forests are marked as a protected in the reserve forest. As I told you that in the reserve forest, the villagers are not at all allowed. In the protected forest, the villagers are allowed, but they have to take the permission from the basically from the Britishers. Then only they are allowed. So that basically restrict the movement of the people specifically in those regions, right? And the Britishers also suspicious about these pastoral groups. They used to suspicious how and what type of activity they used to perform, right? And there was many tribes that were also criminal in the nature, right? They used to conduct a lot of robbery and all other activities. So criminal tribal acts were also passed in 1871 that declared the whole tribal community criminal, right? And Britishers basically imposed taxes on the kettles, right? That tax was basically ramp up very rapidly. Okay, so how this changes which was imposed by the Britishers have affected the life of the pastoralism. So first of all, the natural restoration of the pastoral growth was completely stopped, because for that pastoral population to grow, you need basically the pasture land. Once the pasture land is not there, how will you restore the pastoral growth? That is also not possible. The cattle also died due to the scarcity of the fodder, because you don't have the good quality of pasture land, you don't have the good quality of the fodder, so definitely the cattle will be dying in that process, because there is scarcity of the fodder. There is a serious shortage of the pastures, because the pasture lands were basically either restricted their movement by the Britishers, or they were converted into the cultivable lands. So definitely there is a shortage of pastures. So how did the pastoralists basically cope up with these changes? So first of all, definitely some pastoralists basically reduce the number of cattle in their herds. So they reduce drastically. For example, if they used to keep 500 or 1000 cattle, they used to reduce it to 100 or 50, right, in their herd, right? Some people also discover the new pastures, right, because such type of pastoral activities were banned. Now instead of moving to the old grazing land, they used to move to the new grazing lands, right? Definitely that would become difficult. Now over the years, some rich pastoralists begin buying the land and settling down and giving up the nomadic life. So many people, instead of living just like a nomadic life, like moving from one place to another with the help of with their cattle, they just simply started living a permanent settled life in the villages, right? So they completely give up their the nomadic life and started living just like a normal village life, that is a settled life at one place. So that is how they have basically resorted to some changes. Now let's understand what was the pastoralism in Africa. So first of all, you must understand, just like India, the Africa's population is somewhat different. So here half of the world pastoralist population lives in Africa. That means the pastoralism is one of the main occupation of the people specifically in the Africa. What of the half world pastoral population lives in the Africa, specifically the Maasai people are basically pastoralist, right? They changes in the way their life changes. So Maasai primarily lives in the East Africa region. Okay, so before colonial times, what happens is these Maasai land is used to stretch over the larger area, right? The Maasai people used to venture over the larger tract of the land from north Kenya to the steppes of the northern Tanzania. So they used to have the vast area that is also denoted as a Maasai land, where the Maasai people used to live. But what happens is, due to the colonial ingress in those lands, so because of the advent of these imperial powers, they basically divided this Maasai land into half, and that too they were scattered Maasai lands over the period of the time. So the land that was there previously, now they have reduced to half, right? And the grazing land that was basically needed to graze for their animals, they were gradually taken over, right? Obviously these grazing lands were basically converted for the settlement, specifically for the white people settlement, right? Now the Maasai people used to live in that good grazing land. They were pushed to the arid zone, right? The arid zone where there is uncertain rainfall, there is a poor pasture, there is no pastoral land first of all. Now these Maasai people was basically left out with no pasture land, right? So there were many people that were died at that point of the time, because they pushed to the arid zone instead of this good pasture lands. So what happens is, the land cultivation was the bay. So in the pre-colonial period, the Maasai pastoralists dominated the agriculturalists both economically and politically, right? And now what happens is that whenever the Britishers colonial government came or the European colonial masters came, they basically encouraged the local peasants to cultivate this land. The borders were completely closed, right? And the colonial government or imperial government used to impose lot of restrictions, specifically on the mobility of African pastoralists, right? Because they were also suspicious of their movement, just like in India. Okay, and not all were equally affected, specifically in the Masai land. So Masai society was basically divided into two social categories, that is elders and the warriors. Okay, now elders forms basically the ruling group, right? The elders basically form the ruling group. They used to give some sort of a judgments, right? Just like our elders in the society. And the warriors basically consisting of the younger population. So what the younger population generally does in any society, they used to defend. They used to defend the community. They used to organize the cattle raids, right? In that they used to capture the cattle, right? So there are a lot of other activities that were also performed by the young people. So elders were basically generally your ruling people, or they used to have the ruling group, and warriors are basically consisting of the younger people. Okay, now the Britishers basically used to interfere in that life also. So the Britishers appointed the chiefs of the different subgroups of the Maasai, right? So what happens is these chiefs of the different subgroups basically responsible for the affairs of the tribe, and there was also clear some sort of a intervention in the life of the Maasai people, right? So the chiefs which were appointed by the colonial government, they were basically not interested in the welfare of those Maasai people and the welfare of those tribal people. What they are interested, since they are appointed by the colonial government, they are appointed by the Britishers. They were mainly interested in basically in the accumulation of the wealth, rather than on the welfare of the Maasai people, rather than to taking care of the society. They were mainly interested in filling of their pockets with the money, rather than serving the Maasai people, right? So they were both pastoral and non-pastoral income, because some people who were basically working in the pastoral, they were also have to pay certain type of taxes for that, right? And there were also the people who were not working in the pastoral activities. There were some non-pastoral taxes for that, right? And they could buy also the animals when their stocks were basically depleted. So that is how some life were basically affected, and some were not affected in that process. So what happens is, there were poor pastoralists who were mainly involved in the pastoral activities. They depended not only on their livestock, right? So because you must understand, the poor pastoralist, they were mainly dependent on the livestock because they don't have the land for the cultivation, right? So over the period of the time, they were impacted very heavily, very negatively, because they don't have the resources to tie over the bad times. They were only one resource, that is the cattle. That too, the cattle are of no use, right? So in the in the time of war, in the time of famine, they lost everything. Their community, their lifestyle, their cattle, right? They lost. Lot of people were died at that point of the time. It was basically adversely because of the colonial policies that were imposed and their fragmentation of those Maasai land, specifically in the East Africa region. So that is how their life was completely distorted, disturbed by the colonial master at that point of the time. All right. So that's all for today. Thank you very much. We'll meet again tomorrow for our the next class. Tomorrow you will have the last class for class 9th. So please wait, and tomorrow we'll meet again at the right time. Thank you very much.